Hello, today I will be covering Passage 4 of the Science section in the first practice ACT test from the official ACT guide. For Science sections, I like to first skim over the entire passage, and then look at the questions and see which parts of the passage I need to read in more detail. So I will present the entire passage. Please pause the video and read at your own pace. Alright, so we'll move on to the first question, question 21. It reads, in both studies, as the percent by volume of vermicompost increased from 0% through 100%, the average yield, and then we have a few options, decreased only, decreased then increased, or increased then decreased. So we want to see trends from both studies, and we want to see as they change with the percent of vermicompost from 0 to 100%. Okay, so we can see study 2 right now with figure 2, and we go from mixture 1 to 6. Let's revisit the table and see what that means by percentage of vermicompost. We see here that percent by volume of vermicompost goes from 0 to 100 as we go from mixtures 1 to 6. So this corresponds with 0% to 100% vermicompost. It appears that in study 2, the yield goes up and then it goes down. Let's go and revisit study 1. Again, we see close to the same trend. It goes up and then it goes down. Though which mixture is best is different from study 1 and study 2. However, the trend is the same. It increases and then decreases. So that corresponds with option D, increased then decreased. D is the correct answer. The next question, question 22, reads, in study 1, which of the following mixtures was most likely intended to serve as a control for the effect of vermicompost on plant yield? So it's asking, which mixture served as a control for the effect of vermicompost? Let's go over the table and see what the different mixtures are composed of. Okay, so mixture 1 has 0 vermicompost and 100% potting soil. And all the other mixtures have some amount of vermicompost and a different amount of potting soil. However, it appears that mixture 1, because it consists of 0% vermicompost and 100% potting soil, is effectively just regular old potting soil. So, it appears that the control for the effect of vermicompost, so the baseline with no vermicompost, is just 100% potting soil, which corresponds to mixture 1. We go to the possible answers, and we see that F is mixture 1, so F is the correct answer here. The next question, question 23, asks, suppose that in study 1, average yield had been calculated in kilograms per plant, instead of grams per plant. The average yield for mixture 5 would have been, and then we have a few options here. So in this case, the question isn't actually asking about anything in the passage, it's just asking you to convert from grams per plant to kilograms per plant. We do have to go to the passage and see what the amount is for mixture 5 in study 1. So let's do that. Study 1 is figure 1, so we scroll down here, and then we look at mixture 5. We see that it's somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 grams per plant, maybe around 3,500 grams per plant. We now convert that to kilograms per plant because we know that there are 1,000 grams in 1 kilogram. So to do that, we take 3,500 and divide by 1,000, or move the decimal point 3 places over, and we end up getting 3.5 kilograms per plant, which corresponds to option B. Question 24 says, which of the factors listed below were the same in study 2 as they were in study 1? Number of pots used per mixture, length of time needed to perform the study, or volume of each pot. So we have 3 things here, and we need to figure out which ones were the same in study 2 and study 1. So now we actually have to dig into the meat of what study 1 and study 2 did. So here, study 1 says, okay, equal amounts of mixtures, 36 2-liter pots. Okay, so number of pots used per mixture. We can see that there were 6 pots used per each mixture based on this first part of study 1. We can kind of look at, okay, 36 here, and then each of the 6 pots for each mixture. Let's see, number 2 here says the length of time needed to perform the study. For the next 158 days. That's the important part here, 158 total days. Something happened in between, but the total study time was 158. The third part is the volume of each pot. and right off the bat we see that it's 2 liters per pot. So we have 6 pots per mixture based on study 1. The length of time is 158 days, and the volume for each pot is 2 liters. Going down and seeing what study 2 did, we see that the procedures of study 1 were repeated, except we used different seeds. The pots received water and light for 149 days instead of 158 days, so that's important. We'll highlight that there. Seedling removal occurred, and plant yield was measured there. Okay, so going back over here, we see that 1, 2, and 3, the number of pots used per mixture, the length of time was different, but the volume was the same, and the number of pots was the same. So we see that 1 and 3 were the same between both studies. 2 was different. We look at the different options here. F is 1 and 2 only, G is 1 and 3 only. Alright, 1 and 3 only, G is the correct answer. Alright, question 25 says, is the statement, tomato plants require a lower proportion of vermicompost in the potting soil to achieve maximum yield than do pepper plants, consistent with the results of studies 1 and 2? So, between studies 1 and 2, they used different seeds. One used a tomato plant and the other used pepper plants, and we need to figure out, is the statement true? Tomato plants require a lower proportion to reach maximum yield than pepper plants. Let's go back and look at the 2 studies to figure out which one used tomato and which one used pepper plants. Over here we have study 2. The procedures of study 1 are repeated, except we used 5 C. annum seeds instead of 3 S. lycopersicum seeds. Now I don't know about you, but I don't necessarily know what that means right off the bat. But in science sections, you often don't have to have any outside knowledge. All the stuff that you need is inside the passage itself. So we'll scroll up here to see where they define what these mean. We have Capsicum annum is a pepper plant, and the lycopersicum is a tomato plant. So annum pepper, lycopersicum tomato plant. We see 5 C. annum seeds were used instead of the lycopersicum. So study 2 used pepper and study 1 used tomato plants. So now that we know that study 1 used tomato plants and study 2 used peppers, we can evaluate where the maximum yield occurred. Looking at the results from study 1 in figure 1, we see that the maximum yield occurred in mixture 2. Looking at study 2, we see that the maximum yield occurred with mixture 3. So in study 2, we needed a mixture 3 instead of mixture 2 to get the maximum yield. And the question is asking here, and this is a bit tricky here, we need to read these carefully. Tomato plants require a lower proportion. So study 1 was tomato plants, and it had mixture 2, and study 2 was pepper plants, and you needed mixture 3. Now we need to evaluate what the mixtures mean. Mixture 3 had 40% vermicompost, and mixture 2 had only 20% vermicompost. So mixture 2 had less vermicompost than mixture 3, and that means that tomato plants achieved the maximum yield with less vermicompost than pepper plants, which achieves maximum yield with slightly more vermicompost. Alright, so now that we know that that statement is true, let's look at the options for question 25. Is this consistent with the results of study 1 and 2? We know C and D are not the correct answers because they both say no. A and B may be correct because they both say yes. Let's look at the specific reasons that they give to say yes. A says, yes, in study 1, the greatest average yield was attained with mixture 2. Alright, that's true. Whereas in study 2, the greatest average yield was attained with mixture 3. And we scroll up, and just like we saw before, that is true. So based on this, the correct answer is A. Question 26 says, in a 2-liter pot, the presence of more than one plant can negatively affect the growth of all plants in the pot due to competition among the plants. What action was taken in the studies to prevent competition among the plants? We have a few options here. 1 seed per pot, 1 seedling per pot. After initial period of growth, all but 1 seed was removed from each pot. Or, after initial period of growth, all but 1 seedling was removed from each pot. So there are some subtleties here. We have seed and seed, seedling and seedling, and then just planted per pot, just 1. Or, after initial period of growth, all were removed except 1. Let's go back up to the passage and see what we can find out. Alright, so in this dense block here for study 1, we can kind of skim through here. Alright, on day 28 of the 158 days, all the seedlings that had emerged were removed from the pots with the exception of a single seedling in each pot. Alright, so that sounds very relevant. A single seedling in each pot. Okay, so let's scroll down. And no, it's not F or G because many seedlings were planted per pot. Let's scroll up and see. Yeah, 3 seeds were added to each pot. Okay, so it's definitely not F and G. It might be H or J because after an initial period of growth, something happened. Alright, it wasn't all but one seed was removed because it says seedling was removed. So we know that the correct answer is J. Alright, our last question for this passage, question 27, says S. lycopersicum and C. annum required water and light for the process represented by which of the following expressions? And then we have a few kind of chemical equations here. All of them have water and light on the left side, and they all turn into something else. So now this question actually requires outside knowledge not presented in the passage. Let's go through it and try to figure out what plants do. So we know that tomato and pepper plants are both regular old plants. They're green, they probably photosynthesize. And what do you know about plants? Often they take in carbon dioxide and they produce oxygen. What else do we know about these plants in particular? If we scroll up, there's actually one little nugget of useful information in the passage. The yield of a plant species is the mass of fruit produced per plant of the species. So the important part here is the yield is the mass of fruit. Okay, so what is fruit? Generally it's some sort of sugar, and a type of sugar is glucose. So let's go through here. Alright, A has water and light becomes glucose, oxygen, and carbon dioxide. Cool, that has glucose. B has glucose on the left-hand side and it becomes something else. So B is not correct because the yield is the fruit, and fruit is glucose. C has it becoming glucose, good, and D has it becoming glucose. So it could be A, C, or D. Now let's see here. A has just water and light becoming glucose, oxygen, and carbon dioxide. Now we know that through photosynthesis and what plants do, they take in carbon dioxide and they produce oxygen. This is how all the trees bounce out people and animals breathing. So let's look at the available options here. We already know it's not B, so we'll cross that out. A doesn't have carbon dioxide going in, and C has oxygen coming in, but we know it's supposed to be carbon dioxide for the correct photosynthesis and respiration for plants. And so we know that the correct answer here is D. Alright, so let's recap what we learned from this passage. In the beginning, it asks mostly about the different mixtures and how the changes from 0 to 100% vermicompost, what happens to the yield and how it increases or decreases. We had a unit conversion here going from grams to kilograms. We had one option where we had to look at the different studies and see what they did differently. We had to agree or disagree with the statement here, and that required us kind of better understanding what happened in study 1 and study 2. Going on, we also had to figure out what exactly the parameters were for the experiments. And the last question actually required some outside knowledge that we had to try to figure out based on some clues from the passage. So again, in general, most all of the information that you need will be in the passage. You just have to figure out how to read or skim for it. However, sometimes you do need just a little bit of outside knowledge to help you understand the problem better and then answer the question correctly. Thank you for watching, and I hope this helped.